Yeah. Young man right here. Yeah.
My name is Vance. I'm from the great state of Montana.
It's a beautiful state.
My question for you, Mr. President, is how is the United States government helping American Indian people revitalize their language and culture? Because so many of our young men and boys don't know who they are because they've lost their culture and language. And the United States government has tried so hard for the past 200 years to destroy that.
Look, it's a great question. As you may be aware, I was at an Indian reservation in South Dakota recently, and I met with a group of young people. There's young men and women, wonderful young men and women, just extraordinary. And I won't share with you exactly what they told me about their lives because it was private, and they really opened up. But I can tell you that it was heartbreaking to hear some of the stories, in part because you got a sense of what the history of the interaction between the United States government and Native American peoples had done to the culture. The Bible says, without vision, people will perish. And what happens when you start losing your language and you start losing your culture and you don't have a sense of connections to ancestors and those memories that date back generations, is you start feeling adrift. And if you're living in a society that devalues that, then you start maybe devaluing yourself and internalizing some of those doubts. Now, the good news is what we started seeing, for example, at the powwow that existed at the reservation, there was a Lakota language school for little kids starting very early. They were learning math and science and all the subjects, but they were also in an immersion school, essentially, in their own language to empower them. And part of what I've been talking to Secretary Duncan about and Sally Jewell, who's the head of the Department of Interior, about is how do we incorporate more effectively into the school curriculums, into social programs, et cetera, a recognition of the distinct cultures of these native peoples. Because if young people come up proud of their past, then they'll have a more powerful sense of direction going forward. Now, one thing I have to just say about all this, though, is the world is what it is. It is a global world. We live in the 21st century. When I was up at the reservation, everybody had a cell phone. Everybody wanted to take selfies like they always do. People were texting. And so you can't ignore what's happened. You can't just live in the past. You also have to look to the future, which means that all the young Native Americans are also going to have to learn math, science, computer sciences, engineering. There has to be an adaptation to what is increasingly a world culture, even as you are also then connecting it back to your roots. And sometimes that's hard, right? And part of what's great about America is the way that we all take these different cultures and we make one culture out of it. And we shouldn't lose that. That is, we're not just a collection of, Jews and Irish and Native American and black. We're also Americans. So we have a common culture that binds us together. There's no contradiction between knowing your culture, the traditional cultures out of which your families come, but also being part of the larger culture. And I think that one of the things, this is true not just for Native Americans, but it's also true for African Americans. Sometimes African Americans in communities where I've worked, there's been notion of acting white, which sometimes is overstated, but there's an element of truth to it where, okay, if boys are reading too much, then, well, why are you doing that? Or why are you speaking so properly? And the notion that there's some authentic way of being black, that if you're going to be black, you have to act a certain way and wear a certain kind of clothes, that has to go, because there are a whole bunch of different ways for African American men to be authentic. You know, Michelle, you look at Michelle, she grew up South Side. And her mom still lives in a neighborhood where gunshots go off, and it can be rough in where Michelle grew up. But she'll talk proper when she needs to. Now, you also don't want to get on her wrong side, because she can translate that into a different vernacular. But my point is that you don't have to act a certain way to be authentic. You just have to be who you are, and to go back to the values that you care about. Are you kind? Are you responsible? Do you work hard? Can you delay gratification? Well, the same is true in the Native American context, right? We want to get past the idea that there's a certain way of being Native American. You need to know your culture, but you can also be part of this larger world. And there's some cultures, frankly, who've done this better than others. I mean, I do think, for example, Jewish culture has been very powerful. If you look in our society, the ability to transmit traditions through synagogues and the Torah and bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, so that people have a sense of 2,000 years of history, but everybody's still part of today and America and the world. In many Asian American cultures, when they are part of first-generation immigrant, they might have a whole separate set of classes on weekends or after school where they're learning their native tongues, the mother tongue, but they're still focused when you're in school, this is how you're doing things. So I think this is something that we have to spend some time thinking about, making sure that we understand there's a way of knowing your history, knowing your culture, being proud of it, using it as a strength, but not thinking that there's just one way of you then having to act. I think that's very important. All right. Let me take